So that is while 11.5% seems small, it is rising, and it is a large amount of our youth that is using this stuff. Why we care? This was all taken from Colorado when they legalized. They took a good look at, hey, what has happened since we've legalized? What they found out was emergency room visits related to marijuana increased by 54%, and hospitalizations increased by 101%.
Investigator 805.
Suicides where toxicology tests indicated marijuana had been used increased from 7.6 to 23%. In Colorado, a big fact that a lot of people don't know is when these states passed legalization of recreational cannabis, they say, oh, look at how much tax revenue this is going to bring in. What Colorado found was that for every dollar they brought in from tax, they spent $5 elsewhere, whether that be on roadway fixing for crashes or rehabilitation or emergency, whatever it may be. For every dollar brought in, $5 goes out. And that's been pretty common through every state that has legalized this stuff. Marijuana-related DWIs in Colorado cost about approximately $25 million in 2016. So I don't know about you, but I think our state could probably go without another $25 million in taxes, because that's just going to cost you and I in our day-to-day lives. Before we get into the legalities of things, I want to talk about cannabis and the plant. I'm sure many of you have heard cannabis, marijuana interchangeably, but they are different. That's what we're going to kind of start with. The first thing you want to know is that cannabis is the entire plant. The actual name for it's cannabis sativa. And in a minute, that's going to get a little bit confusing, but I'll try to make it clear for you. That actual plant contains 540 chemicals. So it is a very complex plant, and it's something that a lot of people are unaware of. And we'll talk going forward about how much people can tweak that to create different effects on the person. When we talk about marijuana, that's part of the plant cannabis sativa that contains THC and or CBD. And we'll talk about THC and CBD in a minute. So right here, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, that's going to be the psychoactive ingredient in the plant. This is the product that's going to make people get high and act different, similar to someone getting drunk. It's going to cause that impairment. CBD is non-psychoactive, but it has a lot of medical benefits. I'll be the first person to say I do believe that there are medical benefits for it if used in the right time and place. But the other part we want to know is a lot of times with the recreational users and the stuff we see on the street is going to be high THC. That's what we're going to look for. There is different kinds of THC, and we'll talk about those in a second as well. One thing I wanted to touch on as well is the life cycle. So at the end of this presentation, when I talk about the house file, keep this in mind. And we'll talk about how going forward, when this gets legalized, people can have 8 plants. And there's specificities on which kind of plant they can have. So I wanted to go through this. When somebody plants a seed to grow that plant, germination's 3 to 10 days when that thing starts sprouting. The seedling is another life cycle. It's 2 to 3 weeks when the plants develop its first leaves. Vegetative is 3 to 16 weeks. It really depends on the actual farmer and how their lights are and their water and their pH balance and all of that thing all plays into it. So 3 to 16 weeks, that's when it's called a juvenile plant. It grows stalks, branches, stems, and fans leaves. And then flowering, this is the most important part for us. And again, we'll touch on it, but 8 to 11 weeks. And it produces, this is when the plant produces buds that the people will pull off and use, smoke, or whatever they choose to do with it. A good plant, so I've been told, a good plant in a greenhouse can produce about 4 pounds of bud. So again, that's someone that knows what they're doing, but it is possible. When we look at the bud of the cannabis, the part that contains the most THC, what these farmers and scientists do is they'll take this under microscopes and look at what's called the trichomes. So for those of you that may or may not listen to rap songs, you may have heard of like ooey gooey or sticky or honey or stuff like that. when those songs talk about that, what they're actually talking about is these trichomes. It is sticky. It feels like honey. If you put it in between your fingers, it is really sticky. I don't know how else to. It's almost like gum. The tiny crystal-like resin glands, they contain more than 50% of the THC and CBD in that plant. So what they'll do is they look at this and they'll look at the color of it and the consistency of it. Each consistency and color do something different to the body. So a lot of times when we get going forward, we'll look at the amber color. It turns into honey and wax and shatter dab, things like that. That's what's going to cause a more body and couch-like high. It's going to put people on their butts. There's different types of marijuana as well. So the plant cannabis sativa there's different forms of it. The first one's going to be cannabis sativa. Second one's cannabis indica sativa, and then the third one's hybrid, which is going to be the most popular. This is the one that's made in a greenhouse where they cross-pollinate in order to get that plant to the desired outcome they want. What we need to know is sativa is the first kind. So the plant itself is going to be tall and skinny, and same with the leaf, as you can see in that picture. What this strain of it does is creates more of a energetic, feel-good high, kind of a mind high. A lot of times when the users of this use sativa, they say it makes them more creative, more artistic, things like that. So it's going to make them more excited and happy. The second kind that we talked about is indica. Indica is the one that puts you in the couch. It makes you lazy, makes you want to. My thought that comes to my mind is you think about the cartoons and they grab some chips and sit and watch some TV or something like that. That's what this is going to make them do. It's going to make them a little more relaxed, may reduce nausea and pain, increase the appetite. And we'll talk about this when we get to medicinal, but a lot of this can be used for illnesses like cancer, where if someone's on chemotherapy, they're going to be nauseous, so this will suppress some of that nausea and increase appetite. When we look at the plant itself, the plant is going to be short and stocky, same with the leaves, as you can see in that picture. They're a little bit shorter, a little bit fatter. Then the most common that we see and that we will see going forward is hybrid. This is, again, a farmer or a scientist puts it in a greenhouse. They cross-pollinate it a whole bunch. They'll take this plant and this plant to cross-pollinate, and then take that plant with this new plant, cross-pollinate it to get to their desired outcome. They are very good at this, and there are scientists that can make these, as you see in that picture there. The leaves are purple pink. They can plant this and grow it underwater hydroponically. There's all sorts of different things they can do, and they can get whatever desired outcome they want. Again, this is going to be your most common. And there's kind of a 3 side-by-side with the caveat that hybrid strain, the leaf you see there, is just an example. It can really look like anything. It could be more fat and short. It could be longer, skinny. It could be purple, etc. So just know that there are different kinds out there, and a whole bunch of different things that these farmers can do. Now we're going to go back to THC. So we talked about THC, a little bit about CBD. We talked about trichomes. We talked about the different strains. Now we're going to be talking about the different types of THC. So again, tetrahydrocannabinol, it's responsible for most of the psychological effects. This is the part of the plant, the chemical in the plant that creates people to act funny, be high, and ultimately what we're focused on is it causes them to drive very poorly and make poor decisions. There are different types of THC. Some of the more common ones I have listed there. Understand that there are a whole bunch of them as well, and I'll go through some of these. So first one is THCA. This is going to be basically straight off the plant. As you can see in their picture, a lot of times it's the oil. It's used for all sorts of different things. Again, a lot of it's your topicals and your oils and things like that. The only thing that they have to do to get from THCA to Delta 9 is add a little bit of heat. And I'll go back to those other ones in a minute. So you take THCA, you add some heat, smoke it, it turns into Delta 9, and this is going to be your most common on the street. Again, someone grabs a butt of marijuana, they put it in their pipe, they smoke it, boom, we have Delta 9. We'll talk about that. Second type, or the third type, is THCV. It's a byproduct of THCA. It's not extremely common, but they will use it a lot of times in the medical field. Can help lose weight, or so they say. And it's kind of funny as well, because something I want to mention is every single person has what's called Delta 9 or THC receptors in their stomach lining. So if you hear people say that they have the munchies, that is actually a true thing. When somebody ingests THC, it attaches to those receptors and makes them can make them get the munchies. There's no mind-altering properties in low doses for this. They may feel effects more rapidly, appetite suppressant, and can help lose weight. Some of the benefits, again, diabetes, pain and swelling, anxiety, etc., etc. For those of you, usually when I'm in person, I take a kind of a quick poll and ask who's heard of Delta 8. A lot of people have. This was a hot topic a little bit ago. Most states that have recreational cannabis don't see a whole lot of this anymore. What happened was they realized, hey, Delta 9 is illegal, right? It's a Schedule 1 controlled substance, and we'll talk about what that means in Minnesota here. But the users wanted to find a way that they could use cannabis legally. So what they did is they took that plant and they put it into a scientist's hands, and they figured out a way to change some of the chemicals in this to make Delta 8. When they did this, it made it no longer controlled. Thus why we see it in smoke shops and things like that. It was fully legal for them to do. When we talk about it, though, it is not as potent as Delta 9. And this is a thing a lot of people grabbed onto. It's not as potent. It's not as potent. Well, what are these people doing? They're using more of it to get the same effect. It's not rocket scientist, right? We know what they're doing. And I'll hit on this now, and I'll hit it on it again. With any of this stuff, you want to focus on impairment. It doesn't matter what they're taking. Doesn't matter how long they've been taking it or anything like that. If they're impaired, they're impaired. That's it. Plain and simple. Delta 9 we touched on a little bit. This is going to be your most common without a doubt. This is when we talk about THC. If someone says, hey, they have THC, 99% of the time they're talking about Delta 9. And then Delta 10. This is another thing. Again, I think this is kind of a personal opinion. I think we'll see this drizzle away a little bit with the legalization going forward. Again, what they're doing is, okay, the government caught on to Delta 8. They're trying to fix that. Now we're going to try to figure out something else, and we created Delta 10. There was talk of this for a while, but what we found out was that a lot of people, actually most people, cannot actually make this to a good quality. They're making it and it's like 60%, maybe 70%, but it's nothing that's really good. It is very difficult to make, so a lot of I really don't know of anyone that's or anywhere in any states that have said that they found someone that can make it very well. So again, I don't think we'll see this in the near future with the full legalization, but we will see. I could be completely wrong. Another big misconception that we need to talk about, and there was some trying to, I guess, get this through the legislators, but it obviously didn't go very far. When people think about THC levels and marijuana, they're thinking about the 80s and 90s weed. In the 80s and 90s, the THC levels were 2 to 4%. You would have to use quite a bit of that to get you high. Today, and this is now 9 years ago, 2014, it averaged 14%, some strains 11, 37. And you want to fast forward to today, we're looking at mid-20s for probably an average, 23, 24, and some strains going to the 40s, mid-40s. So it's a lot stronger. It takes a lot less to get people high than back in the 90s and 80s. CBD, we'll talk about this in a minute as well. I'm sorry I keep saying that, but when we talk about your non-intoxicating or CBD, it's 0.3%. That's always been that way. So just keep that in your mind when we're talking CBD, non-intoxicating, kind of interchange, 0.3% THC. Edibles, it really depends on the manufacturer and what they want to do with it. If they want it really strong, they can make it really strong. If they don't want it strong, they don't have to make it as strong. It really depends what they want. One of the most important parts of this that we need to understand is the next part, the wax and dab. We'll talk about that in a minute as well, but that stuff is upwards of 99% THC. It takes a dab, or if you think about a dental pick, you take a little bit on the tip of one of those, that will get somebody extremely high. And then Leafline Lab products, that's just an example of medicinal cannabis. Again, that can be all over the spectrum. It really depends on what they want and what illness they're trying to help with. So going back to that shatter, dab, wax, resin, hash, butane hash oil, there's all sorts of different names. It just depends on how they make it. Ultimately, it's the same concept. They're taking all of the trichomes off of the plant and concentrating them down to what you can see here. This is the most common what we see on the road is probably that right picture. When you look at that right picture, another misconception is, okay, that's not very much. We're just gonna charge it out like it's loose leaf marijuana. The issue with that picture on the right, that could get probably 50 people high. That's a lot of wax. The most common method of making this stuff is what they do with butane hash oil. They take a cylinder, they fill it up with their bud, they put a coffee filter on the bottom, and then they push butane through the top, and it drips out into a Pyrex dish, and then they put that Pyrex dish over a hot plate or boiling water to get rid of all of the liquid, and then it turns into this honey substance. Now, if you guys all remember back when clandestine labs were common with methamphetamine, a lot of states are seeing this come back because they're making butane hash oil using butane and then putting it over something hot or an open flame. And what do you think happens? Explosions or fire. So there have been a spike in other states on house fires and things like that due to making this stuff. So another thing to be aware of. So we talked about the plant now. Try to give you a baseline of what that is. And now we're going to start from where Minnesota started out with when it came to legalization, which is medicinal. And then we're going to work forward. So the history in 2014, Governor Dayton signed that bill. 2015, when distribution began, it started with that fairly short list of illnesses. And then it has grown, which you'll see in a second here. But 2 distributors in Minnesota and 13 locations. Green Thumb, Green Goods in Minnesota. That is still true. There is only 2. It will get interesting going forward with recreational, how that looks. But from my understanding, they're going to make it kind of the same and not change it. So we'll see. Today we have 19 different conditions, and as you can see, the bottom 2 haven't even started yet until August. So a lot of questions with this stuff is, okay, for those of you that may or may not know, medicinal cannabis is not cheap. It's not. So the whole question that's been brought up is, why would people use medicinal cannabis if recreational is going to be legalized? A lot of that comes down to the concentration, but also how much is being dosed and things like that. They can control a little bit better in medicinal than recreational. But we will see, and I guarantee you we'll see a lot of people leave their medicinal and just smoke on their own. So that'll be interesting as well. A couple of things here. There's a lot that's going to be written on the slides in the next few here. I'm just going to touch on a few of them. So there are very specific rules on what has to be followed when it comes to labeling and who can get it and things like that. So a big thing, and you'll see this going forward with the edibles that passed last year, but the packaging has to be plain, designed to maximize life shelf, tamper evident, child resistant, and again, must not bear a reasonable resemblance to any commercially available product. packaged to minimize its appeal to children as well. So it can't have any cartoons or things like that. This is exactly true with edibles as well. You'll see that. Some labeling things. Something that a lot of people don't know is that when people get put into this program, they get assigned a patient registry identification number, and that's going to be tied to all of their quote unquote prescriptions. It's going to contain a lot of things and able for the state to pull up their information just like that. It also has to have their ingredients with the common names as well. Another part with that is all of these are tracked very well in the sense that if you get a medical or a prescription, quote unquote, for the medical cannabis, the state can go back and tie that number to the date it was harvested, where it was harvested, and all of that, the actual plant it came from. So the tracking is pretty good for this, and hopefully we can use that going forward. Couple labeling requirements. Again, date and the batch number, again, that's what ties that back. And then the statement here that we need to focus on, keep this product out of the reach of children. And I'm going to hit on something else in a second. Notice the statement, with the statement, this medical cannabis is for therapeutic use. Only diversion of this product is unlawful and may result in a revocation of patient's registration. So if they get caught using it outside of how they're supposed to, they could have their registration revoked. Again, what does that mean going forward? Probably not a whole lot, because they can just go into a dispensary and buy what they want. What it looks like today, ignore that bottom part. March 2022, I forgot to take the not part out. In March of 2022, they passed it where medical cannabis can be leaves, buds, and edibles. So basically anything out there, Minnesota can have. Again, if we're in a live room, I would ask you, and I want you to think about this, can medical cannabis impair you? Think about that for a minute. What I want to touch on again is going back to this. The very important part here is going to be where that says keep this product out of the reach of children. If you read the sentence right above that, do not drive or operate heavy machinery when under the influence of this product. We'll talk about that in a second here. You thought about it. Hopefully you all got it correct. There is no true answer. It really depends on the type of medication. Are they using THC, CBD, what the dosage is, the person, their tolerance, chemicals, and are they on any other medications? Another thing that we found out from other states, and is 100% true here, is a lot of people mix cannabis with alcohol or cannabis with benzos or whatever. So that is a very valid point that we need to think about, is are they on other medications? Going back now, can you drive while on it? And the answer is no. It says it right in our requirements, in our statute. Do not drive or operate heavy machinery when under the influence of this product. It says it right there in our statute. A big misconception. The funny part is this doesn't matter if it's CBD or THC. It says it in our statute. You cannot operate heavy machinery. Again, what I would say is focus on is the impairment piece of it. Okay, so we started in 2014 with medicinal, and then last year we decided, hey, let's throw a wrench into things and add edibles. So that is where we are at currently. And then going forward, we'll have something else which we'll talk about. But last year, again, what they did, a big thing you want to know about is subdivision 1, the edible cannabinoid product. Any product that is intended to be eaten or consumed as a beverage by humans contains a cannabinoid in combination with a food ingredient and is not a drug. So they've already put it in their head, it's not a drug. Subdivision 3, non-intoxicating cannabinoids, think your CBD, think your hemp, things like that. No more than 0.3% THC. Again, keep that in mind going forward. 0.3% THC is an important number. Labeling. So we talked about the labels with the medicinal. They decided, hey, let's do something crazy. Let's say that nothing has to be printed on the label. You can just access it with a QR code. Awesome. So you have a smartphone, you scan that, and it pulls up the website with all the information on it. We'll touch on that in just a second. Going forward, kind of the similar to what we saw with medicinal, can't have any cartoons, can't be designed to adhere to children, can't have can't resemble anything trademarked characteristic or product specialized packaging of any commercially available food or product. Another important point, and that'll go forward as well with our upcoming legislation, it can't be Nerd Ropes, can't be Oreo cookies, can't be chips, can't be anything like that. It has to be its own product that doesn't resemble anything else. Another interesting part is the bottom bullet point there. Each dose in that can be 5 milligrams or less, but a package contains 50 milligrams total. So it can have 10 different doses of 5 milligrams. What statute doesn't say is how many packages somebody can have. So as long as there's only 50 milligrams in that package, they could have 10,000 packages, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's also nothing in statute that says an age limit for possessing. It says that somebody has to be 21 to buy it or sell it, but it doesn't say that a 21-year-old could buy it and then gift it to their 12-year-old sibling. There's nothing that says that a 12-year-old couldn't have it in their person. So going forward, just a couple of examples. If we look at these pictures, the picture on the left is a Minnesota-based company. That is stuff that is has been seen and is here. The stuff on the right is a lot of products that you'll see in like Colorado. So if we see that here in Minnesota, that's a violation of the statute, and we cannot have that. Same with this example, another Minnesota-based company on the left. All the stuff on the right is a violation of our statute, and we cannot have it. Yes, that stuff is out there. If you see it, again, just realize it's not legal here in Minnesota. Going back to that QR code, for those of you who have not seen it, I'm sure most of us have. It's that fuzzy box that you see. You take your smartphone, you hold over or open the camera, hold it over there, and a link will pop up. Just like you see there on the left in the middle. You click on that link and it opens their web page and brings you to the information on that product. The big question mark that we had, especially officers out on the road, was, okay, if I open my camera and I hold it over there and I get an error code, what does that mean? That was a big confusing point, because if it looks like and it follows all of Minnesota's statutes and this person is following the rules and you scan your phone and it comes up with an error, should we be citing that driver or person with the violation of the statute, or should we be going after the manufacturer? And it was a really big question that we still don't have a good answer for. The best I can tell you is use your discretion and your judgment on that. All right, and now where are we going? So as you are all aware, and I'm sure why the majority of you are on this call, is to learn a little bit more about this. So House File 100 and Senate File 73 were cannabis legislation. So the big thing, and we talked about this earlier, is when this bill first got introduced, there was cannabis, marijuana, and THC all used all over the place interchangeably, and there was not one consistency through it. The DWI task force is a group that meets monthly. If you're interested in it, feel free to get hold of me. I'll get you on that. But we talk about traffic safety and some legislation. So we met as a group and discussed the bill, and then the chair of it, David Bernstein, went to the legislation and brought some recommendations forward. And this was one of them. Hey, clean up your language, which for the most part they did. So that was one thing we needed to look at. Now that it's passed and I listened to some of our things, these are all items that are in the bill. So I want to spend some time talking about this. The first thing, there is a prohibition in there about using while driving, as well as on school grounds where smoking is prohibited or where the smoke or vapor could be inhaled by a minor. So for the officers on the road, keep that in mind, especially obviously in school areas. We want to be highly concerned with that. But the bottom part is at least the way it reads, is going to be a lot of discretion on your end where the smoke or vapor could be inhaled by a minor. Think about that. Obviously, if they're by a playground, a violation, right? Then we're going forward, it's illegal for adults 21 and older to possess or transport, and there's a list of what they can have. Cannabis paraphernalia, 2 ounces of cannabis flower, 8 ounces of cannabis concentrate, 800 milligrams or less of cannabis or hemp edibles. Hopefully you're all sitting there thinking, wow, that is a lot. And yes, it is. That is a lot of stuff to be walking around with or driving around with. If you think about an ounce, the best way I can put it, if you take a sandwich baggie and you put a bunch of bud in there about the height of a dollar bill, that will be about an ounce, roughly. So think about that. You could have 2 of those. That's quite a bit. Going forward, legal for adults 21 and older to use cannabis in, and here's where they can use it: private residence, on private property, or a licensed premises, meaning if there's a smoke bar or something like that, they could use it there. So again, keep in mind, can't use it in public, can't use it on somebody else's property unless they give you permission, and things like that. So keep that in mind. The other part that I talked about earlier, and I want to touch on again, remember when I was talking about the germination of the plant and how the plant grows. So it's legal to grow 8 plants at your house. However, only 4 of those can be mature enough to flower at once. So if you get someone that really knows what they're doing and they have 4 plants at once that are flowering, that could be, that could be literally 4 to 16 pounds of bud. A lot of times you have to be very good at what you're doing to get that high yield, but either way, that's a lot. So for those of you that work in local jurisdiction, and I say that being a state trooper, if you find yourselves in a house as a local or deputy, keep that in mind. That 4 of them can only be flowering at once. So if you see 8 of them and they all have buds on them, that's a violation. Another thing going forward, what it does is it establishes possession crimes. These are all new. It's 1st through 4th degree, pretty similar to everything else we have. The biggest thing you want to know is, so at first, right, you can have 2 ounces on your person. If you have from 2 to 4 ounces, that first level, so a 2 ounce addition, it's only a petty misdemeanor. It's a simple ticket and take their stuff and send them on their way. Second thing, established sales crimes. So again, new to our statute, 1st through 4th degree. The very first thing is a petty misdemeanor for selling up to 2 ounces without a license. So if I am a street dealer, I can sell 2 ounces without a license and get a citation. What it does do is it caps a minor's crime. So if a minor is selling the stuff, it caps it at a misdemeanor for selling anything more than 2 ounces. And the part I read did not say anything about what that 2 and more goes up to. It just says more than 2 ounces. Another thing we need to be aware of is open package in a motor vehicle. I like this, it's pretty good. This is another thing the task force went to the legislation with, and they adopted most of what we said. So misdemeanor to have a product in a packaging that does not comply with law or have been removed from packaging in which it was sold. So if you're in a vehicle, they just go to the dispensary, they get their product and they open it, that's a misdemeanor. It has to be sealed in the original packaging while it's in a vehicle. Or it has to be in a package that has it cannot be in a package that has been opened or sealed, has been broken, or the contents are partially removed. So ultimately, again, original package, sealed, right from the dispensary, can't be altered. What you need to recognize, again, more so for anyone that's local jurisdictions, deputies, any DNR, things like that. Motor vehicle does not include a boat or ATV in this statute, unless the ATV is on a roadway. otherwise it won't. So we're talking about a vehicle, a car, or a truck, things like that. Another thing that it did that we are already working very diligently and hard on is it adopted an oral fluid roadside testing pilot project, and I'll take a minute to discuss this. It gave the Office of Traffic Safety quite a bit of money to start this pilot project. We have to start it in September, and then we have just about a year for the pilot project to be completed. Once that year is up, we have like I think it's about 4 months to submit a report to legislators to review, and then ultimately decide if it's something we're going to adopt or not. So the way this is going to work, we're still ironing out some of the fine details, but we're going to get a bunch of units, put them in the hands of current DREs, and pilot them, let them try them. We're going to track what the machine is saying, followed up by a fluid test, urine or blood, that gets sent to the BCA for confirmation purposes, and we're going to track all of that data. We're going to try a few different units and hopefully find one that we like, and then again submit it to legislation and ultimately let them decide if this is something we can go forward to. So in the process, ultimately what this would be utilized for is if we're officers on the road, they do field sobriety. If this is an alcohol DWI, say they do field sobriety, when they're going to give that person a PBT, that's when this would be utilized only for drug purposes. The other thing it does is it gives funding. I already mentioned it to the Office of Traffic Safety, but it also gives funding to the DRE program in hopes to get our amount of DREs up to 500. We're about 300 right now, so we have a lot of work to do, but we're gonna get there. Gives funding to the State Patrol for some more training, the Office of Traffic Safety for a few more positions and other different projects that are wanted and needed. But it ultimately also gives funding to local jurisdictions, and that's all going to be through that taxation process. So kind of everyone will see some of it, which is good. At least we got ahead of that and tried to figure that piece out of where this money is going to. And ultimately, they're giving officers and these agencies money to better train people, better train the public, teach the public, things like that. So, and I touched on this earlier, and I want to touch on it again. One of the big pieces that we can do, the legislation talked about it, but it's educating the public, and ultimately that isn't something that's easily done. We can't just send a message out. That's part of it, but we can't just send a message out and go, okay, everyone's educated. What we have to do, each one of us, is learn about cannabis and then use the word of mouth, right? We need to talk about this, not let it be an elephant in the room. Talk about it. Talk about the dangers about driving while on it. Talk about the dangers of using it, things like that. We got to make it less taboo and more open about some of the effects and problems with this. Ultimately, that comes down to each person on this call and whoever's going to watch it in the future to, again, spread some of your knowledge and educate people around you, and hopefully they will do the same and we can get it out. So this is a big part of this that we all need to work at. All right, so we talked about everything marijuana, cannabis, talked about different types, talked about funding, things like that. Now we need to talk about, okay, I know about the plant. What if someone's using it? How do I detect those people? So the first thing you want to realize is that it affects the human body ultimately very differently. It depends on strains. It depends on all sorts of things. So the reason I tell you that is because if you look at it, you see relaxation and drowsiness, but you also see euphoria. You see altered time and distance, impaired memory, mood changes, right? So relaxation, drowsiness, but then you have mood changes, and all of a sudden they could be hyper. It affects people so differently. Some other characteristics. Now, mind you, odor of marijuana, that's going to be if they're using bud, smoking it, things like that, right? If they're using edibles, chocolates, gummies, things like that, you're not going to have that odor. Even some of the concentrates, you might have a little bit of the odor, but a lot of that's going to smell more chemical than your bud. Debris in the mouth, green tongue. Again, this is if they're smoking that bud. If they're using or eating a chocolate bar, they're going to have a chocolatey mouth, right? Or a gummy, same thing. Red bloodshot eyes. Again, it's going to be person dependent, but it most of the time it's going to create that red bloodshot eyes. Body tremors and eyelid tremors. That's the involuntary tremoring of the body or the eyelids. It's very distinct and very common with cannabis use. Some more effects. It affects. Before I even start reading some of these, put yourself behind the wheel and then think about your body being affected by these. Right. That's what we're focused on. It affects your attention, concentration, decision making, inhibition, risk taking, working memory. And there is something to say. I'm hoping most of you have heard that cannabis affects your memory. It absolutely does. There are studies that show your short-term memory, especially, is edited and changed because of cannabis use. So that is something we as officers look for as well. Again, all these other things, it affects that person. Think about them behind a wheel. Do you want somebody driving next to you that has bad decision-making skills or decides to take a few more risks? Or maybe their attention span is even worse than before. We're all humans. We know how our attention spans can be, right? Let's make that a little worse and then put them in a car next to us. Probably not a good idea. So going forward, we're talking about field sobriety. This is going to be more for the officers listening. We always start with our battery of 3 standardized field sobriety tests: horizontal gaze nystagmus, including vertical gaze nystagmus, walk and turn, and one leg stand. Across the board, you're going to start with those. Doesn't matter what they're on. The part that you need to know is that cannabis does not cause horizontal gaze nystagmus. So don't get hung up on that if you don't see it. With that being said, there is a caveat that cannabis impairment can cause lack of smooth pursuit. So if you start doing HGN and you see lack of smooth pursuit, but don't see our other clues, don't be alarmed by that. That is possible with cannabis. Once we get through those, we're like, okay, not seeing HGN, but this person can't balance. Something's going on. Let's add some stuff. Let's add modified Romberg balance test. Don't get hung up on the time that they estimate in that 30-second period, right? We want to look at those tremors. We want to look at their sway. We want to look at their verbal responses after they finish to our questions. How did you get to that? What did you count to? Did you guess? Did you, we want to get those answers. You'd be amazed at what you will hear. A lot of times you'll hear, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but I was just out for DRE certifications and somebody said they imagined what did they say? They imagined the atmosphere spinning or something like that for 30 seconds. Doesn't make any sense. That's a good indicator for us. The next thing you want to do is lack of convergence. That's making or trying to cause the eyes to cross. What cannabis does is it causes the eyes to be unable to cross, and they do all sorts of different things. Sometimes they'll come in and one of them will jump out. So they're looking at different directions. Sometimes they won't even come in at all. There's different things for that. And then ultimately what I recommend is taking a pulse from these people, seeing what their body or their heart rate is at. You might not be able to know at that moment what that means, but we can always, and you can always follow up with a DRE later to figure that out and say, hey, I got a pulse and this is what it is. I have no idea what it means. Could you help me out? And they'd be willing to help you. Hope that one can't wait. So going back to that pulse, what you'll see, again, no HGN, lack of convergence would be present, poor balance. And what we always say is imagine a duck on water when you think about someone on cannabis. You imagine that duck on a pond, they're nice and calm, relaxed on the top, but underneath their feet are going a million miles a minute. Same thing a lot of times with the cannabis user. They'll be calm on the outside, but their internals will be all jacked up and racing. So we're going to look for an increased heart rate and things like that. Eyelid and body tremors, they're very distinct, and you won't miss them. It almost looks like they're shivering. Their eyelids will just bounce up and down really fast. The residue is a great indicator if we have it, again, if they're not using edibles. Slurred speech is possible. A lot of times they'll have a thick tongue, and possibly dilated pupils. A lot of times they'll be above average for dilation. Lack of convergence. I'm hoping I can get this one to work. What I want you to do is look at his right eye, the left eye on your screen. This is a lack of convergence. This is an individual that was only taking cannabis and nothing else. I apologize. You're going to look at his left eye. I'll play it one more time. Look at his left eye, the right eye on your screen. So you're going to bring that stimulus in, and that eye is going to bounce out while the other one stays converged. He has no idea that that's happening, and he cannot control that. And then here's a demonstration of eyelid flutters. So again, cannabis only. She has no idea that this is happening and cannot control it. Very distinct, very common with cannabis use. Next thing I'm going to talk about, just have a couple more minutes, I want to leave time for some questions, is your blood levels. So when it's important, when you're investigating these cases, you want to get blood promptly, or urine, but mostly blood, because in urine, we're not going to be able to see a quantified result. So saying we're getting blood here, there's going to be three different things that come back, actually more, and I'll show you that in a minute, but our three main ones here. The main one, the solid red line that peaks really high, that's going to be your THC level. So as it's going up, that person is actively smoking. It peaks the moment they basically stop smoking. That's when it peaks, and then it immediately crashes down. And if you look at it from about 2 hours to 3.5 hours, it's about the same. After 4 hours, it's bottom line. So we have our best case that we can get is blood from 0 hours to about an hour and a half is going to show that good elevation. Your going down, this is what a blood result looks like. So that top one, delta 9. The second one you see there, the hydroxy, is going to be in here as well. That's going to stay in for it really depends on the person, but 12, 24 hours in some cases. It really depends. That hydroxy, delta 9, 11 hydroxy, is an active it's a metabolite of it, but it is psychoactive, so that will still cause impairment. The 11 nor 9 carboxy, the one below hydroxy, is another metabolite, and that's non-psychoactive. Now, another part that we always hear is, okay, how do we test for cannabis? It stays in the system for weeks. That's the carboxy that stays in your system for weeks. It's non-psychoactive. The BCA can tell which chemical it is, and we can tell if it's psychoactive or not psychoactive. So that carboxy stays in your system. There was a case or a study done. A very chronic user actually had it in the system for 6 weeks, which is an extremely long time. The other thing I want to talk about is the concentration. So we're looking at nanograms per milliliter here. This is, again, focused on impairment. Here in Minnesota, we are not going to have a per se limit. Colorado, it's 5 nanograms. So technically, this individual in this case has 2.95 per se in Colorado. That wouldn't be a DWI. That's not what we want to focus on here. We want to focus on impairment. Recently, the BCA was also able to test for delta 8, CBD, CBN, CBG. So what we need to do, again, as officers in these cases as a whole, is talk about the totality of the circumstance. Everything I just went over, there's not one single thing that can point to cannabis. We have to take the entire picture, put it together, and present a good case to the prosecutors so that they can charge accordingly. A lot of that falls on the officers. A lot of it also falls on communication between you and your prosecutor to know that you're all on the same page. So we're going to get all the way down to your training and experience. When you're on the stand and they ask you for a training and experience, don't short yourself on it. Tell them everything. Driving conduct, if we have it, observations, admissions, every detail matters in these cases, and we need to lay every detail out for the courtroom so that they understand. Don't leave anything out, because again, it's not just one piece of evidence that's going to get you a conviction or get these people charged. It's everything all together, the big picture. And lastly, we're going to touch on a DRE. They're highly trained officers. If you're interested, please get a hold of me. Highly trained officers determine if the person's under the influence of drugs or if they're having a medical condition, if they are under the influence, what categories that they are. The training of it's a 9-day classroom, 2 days of the DRE preschool. Make sure people are up to speed on their A-RIDE and their SFSTs before we get into the 7-day DRE school. We do that, and then we take a certification trip out of Minnesota. Currently, we're going to Philadelphia. We go there for 4.5 days. Do our certifications out there, do the final knowledge exam, which is the next thing on the list. It's a 4-hour or lengthy comprehensive exam that the students take in order to get certified, and then they get recertified every year. They have to have 2 instructor witness evaluations and 8 hours of continuing education. 12-step process real quickly that the DRE runs through. It takes about a half hour, 45 minutes, depending on how cooperative the person is. First thing we're gonna do is make sure it's not alcohol on board. Talk to the officer, figure out why they came into contact with this person, do a preliminary examination. This is really when we figure out if they're having a medical episode or some other issues. Eye examinations, HGN, VGN, lack of convergence, things like that. Divided attention tests, we do finger to nose in here as well as modified Ronberg. Vital signs, we take their blood pressure, we take their pulse 3 times their body temperature. Step 7, darkroom checks, we take a look at their pupils in room light, in near total darkness, and in direct light, which is what you see in the picture there. Then step 8 and 9, we're going to check for muscle tone, see if the muscle is flaccid, flaccid, rigid, or normal. Sorry, I couldn't think of rigid there for a minute. Check for injection sites, take a look at their arms, see if you see any puncture wounds. Intends the interrogation of the subject to see really pinpoint on what they're using, opinion of the evaluator, and then finally a tox sample. So with that, I flew through it. We have about 5 minutes. I just want to leave time for questions. As always, you can reach out to me as well after this.
Do we have any questions at this point? I do want to remind everybody online, this was post-certified, and you can reach out to me if you need a certificate at lisa.cons, K-O-N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, at mnsc.org. And this is also being recorded. And so this will be posted by tomorrow on the Minnesota Nets website at drivesafemn.org. Does anybody have any questions for Tyler? There's one that did come in, or actually a couple. The first is the odor no longer probable cause? And what does that mean?
Great question. Thanks for reminding me. So we are not sure. There's nothing clear in that legislation that says if it is or isn't. What it's ultimately going to come down to is the courts and the Supreme Court to decide on that. There is a case right now being heard on that. The odor we're talking about here especially is going to be breath odor when we're looking for impairment. As far as getting into a car, it's going to be tricky, and honestly, we don't know until we get it through court.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions that you'd like to ask Tyler right now or add in the chat?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, we will go ahead and conclude. We'll stay on the line here for a few minutes. If anyone has any questions they'd like to throw out or throw in the chat. There's going to be 3 other webinars coming up here before August 1st. If you are interested, stay tuned to your email for those.